really understand it at a deep level, there should be two things that you can do. One, you should be able to answer the question. Like if somebody asks you, I'm going to ask you right now, don't answer, it's a long answer. You type an address into your browser and then you're looking at a web page. Tell me everything that happens from when you hit enter to when you're looking at a web page, right? Because there are so many layers, and to understand the security implications of systems and all, you have to understand all these layers and how they interact and what's going on. You can't be like the guy who just knows 853.
Hey, what is up, everyone? I'm Kenny Scott. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Paramify, and today I'm your host of the Paramify podcast. We're stoked to have Rob Sherwood on the podcast. I met Rob last year at a conference in DC, and it was focused on the Open Security Controls Assessment Language, OSCAL. And Rob is an expert in it. He's not only in OSCAL, but Rob's an expert in cybersecurity. He's been over 2 decades focusing on policy management, PKI architecture, identity management. Notably, he's made significant strides in standards development, especially with his work on the Open Security Controls Assessment Language, OSCAL. We're going to talk a lot about it. We're going to talk a lot about that. And at Credentive Security, he was a principal consultant, and through his creation of the oscal-pki-policy-converter tool. Did I say that right, Rob?
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, Rob demonstrates he's clearly dedicated to the space in cybersecurity. He's a big proponent of open collaboration, just like me, and that's why I was interested in having him on the podcast. And especially one of the OSCAL nerds. There's going to be a lot of us, I think, in the future. It's important innovation. So we're going to discuss your career and the evolving landscape of cyber and OSCAL. And you all know, everybody on the podcast, you guys know that the InfoSec cyber community can be really awesome. And Rob is one of the good ones that makes it so. So Rob, thanks for coming on the show. Welcome.
Well, thanks, Kenny. I appreciate the invitation. Yeah, I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing. You're solving problems, which there's some security companies that solve problems and some that maybe make problems. So I'm glad to be talking to somebody who's making the world a little better.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, likewise, right? That is true. There is a craft for let's make some problems and we can profit from that.
Yeah. Yes.
I wouldn't want to go to my grave knowing that that's how I spent most of my life.
Right.
So, but you're definitely not. So Rob, if you could, can you just take us to the beginning? How did you start your career?
So I stumbled into information security in the dumbest possible way. I was talking to somebody at a party, and he mentioned that he was a white hat hacker, and which was a cool way of saying what we do, which is not that cool. And so I was like, oh, that's really interesting. So we spent some time talking to him, and then a couple of weeks later, he was like, yeah, we've got this contract, and we need a bunch of people. Do you want to come in and interview? And I was like, sure. And it was an InfoSec interview, right? And I didn't know that much about InfoSec, so I got a bunch of questions I couldn't answer. But at the end, they started asking me about Linux stuff, Unix stuff, and I was really even back then really into labbing and like playing with technology. So when it got onto ground that I was comfortable with, anyway, I got the job. And this was back in the day when really InfoSec itself was new. So what we would do is we would get some commercial tool, like a scanner tool, and we would just run it in the default configuration, and then print out the report and give no poo 1,000-page reports to customers. And they thought we were doing this amazing thing, and I guess. Whatever, they kept hiring us and really liked our work, but I was like, this is crazy, right? Because this is just, I don't it's a tool, man. You could run the tool. I just ran the tool for you. What do you want, right? But it was like, it was this weird golden age, because like nobody knew what security was. And there were these like super brilliant guys. And then the tooling started coming around, and also that you could kind of have, like, it's something you could learn and pick up and be, useful pretty quickly. So I was very lucky. Very lucky to like stumble, like, just guy came to the party. He was like 6'2", and he had a black tux on and a bald head. And I was like, this guy looks interesting. I'm going to talk to him. And so I guess the moral of the story is just talk to the big guy in the black tux with the bald head.
Yeah. Well, I was glad you went off of a script for me, right? I'm only 5'8" and super unimpressive generally. So you talked to me, but I'm so glad I did. That's so funny. I could picture people.
Yeah.
And now those thousands of pages of reports, and they're like,
yeah,
at it, and they're like,
wow, these guys really did a lot of work.
This is great. This is
great. Yeah. Yeah. There's your task list. Good luck. Wow.
I freaking love it. Oh my gosh. And you're like, all right. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're working a lot. I see on social a lot, and you made a lot of updates to your oscal-pki-policy-converter tool. It's got some updates. Can you elaborate a little bit on the significance of these updates? How's it gonna benefit users in the cyber community?
Yeah. So like we said at the start of the call, I like to solve problems. And we know, I don't have to tell you, and I don't have to tell your listeners, that compliance management is a big problem, right? For enterprises. You have to manage compliance paperwork. There are compliance processes. They're important, right? We all have to do them. They do provide a value, but what they also involve is a lot of like documenting stuff and managing documents when you want to manage problems. So in the federal PKI space, there's a similar problem. There's a lot of complex documents. There are a lot of activities centered around reading the document, interpreting what it means, going to a system, configuring something, and all of the challenges that exist with 853, right? So I believe that the OSCAL standard and the way that it's designed maps very well to our requirements. So I shouldn't say our requirements, the requirements of the federal PKI space. I can't speak on behalf of them.
Yeah.
Just a contractor. But I believe it maps very well to the space. So the challenge, right, is that, when OSCAL was applied to 853, there was this incentive approach, right? There are certain things that you can only do with OSCAL. There are certain things that you can do with OSCAL, and we can demonstrate the benefits from a cost and time reduction perspective. And in the federal PKI space, there isn't quite as much a driver, right? Nobody from NIST, nobody from anywhere is coming to the federal PKI and say, you guys have to do OSCAL or anything like that, right? So what I've been trying to do is to identify a way for my community to benefit from OSCAL with as little initial upfront effort as possible. My sense is that I could go to them and I could give them a great presentation and say, your 5-year ROI is this going to be this number I just made up, right, or whatever, and they might believe it, right? But even then, everyone's accustomed to the. I was talking to the NIST guys, and I was saying everybody's accustomed to the level of suck that exists now, right? So that's that's part of the challenge. So not only taking OSCAL and applying it in the federal PKI space, but developing tooling that allows people to get started with OSCAL with as close to zero friction as possible. And so developed, the end result of a lot of development was the oscal-pki-policy-converter. The tool will let you take an RFC 3647 formatted certificate policy and plug it in. There's a little configuration file that gives the tool a few hints about how to interpret things. But at the end of the day, you get an OSCAL catalog, right? The catalogs will get better over time, right? It's automatically generated, so there's some stuff that you'll have to adjust and tweak. But the point is, you don't have to have somebody sitting in the office learning the OSCAL spec and then spending days converting your policy into OSCAL. And then at the end of all that time, what can you do with your OSCAL policy, right? At least you don't have to spend time to convert it. So that was really the objective, and it's all a part of allowing people in my community to experiment with the standard and try it out and understand how it works and understand that it can work with as close to zero initial investment as possible.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I like it. You're trying to get people, to the 25-yard line, to the 15-yard line, wherever it is, right?
On the field at all, right?
Yeah, on the field at all, right? It's because, we're both like big champions of OSCAL because it's a standard, right? And you're just like, okay,
yeah,
it's actually a standard. It's well thought out. It has everything you need from an InfoSec controls perspective. And we're finding that we can make catalogs for literally anything that's related to risk management. So it won't be just cyber; it will be everything. Where I see it eventually. But what I like about your approach, and we're similar, is there is a steep learning curve. It's just in XML or JSON. It's just a data format that's a little bit more that has more structure than XML. It exists in there, but it takes some expertise to run that, right? So that's where it's great to have a tool like the oscal-pki-policy-converter tool to kind of help you get, like you said, on the field at all. But not only that, but you're benefiting from, OSCAL. So
so we can say things that you can import it into tools. You can map controls and you can all that stuff. But like you can actually take your Word document, create a catalog, and you can try it. You can load it in a tool and see what happens, right? And that's
I can't wait. That's so great.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, and so you're helping them get to the 25-yard line, 15-yard line, wherever it is, right? But you had to learn it, and you've been working on it for a long time, I know. So explain some of maybe from like the entrepreneur side, what are some of the challenges that you're going to encounter while you're building an important tool like this, right? How do you overcome them? You're still going to have them. So talk a little bit about that.
So it's interesting, and I don't know if this is the way anybody else should do it, but I can tell you how I did it and why I did it that way. So
this is what's true, right? That's where you get it, right? Yeah.
So I support a team called the Federal PKI Policy Authority. All of these federal agencies that issues smart cards with certificates to federal employees, of which there are tens of millions, all agree to operate according to certain rules, right? That's the compliance part. And the Federal PKI Policy Authority is essentially the body that sits in the middle to make sure that everybody's playing with the rules, right? And there's a process, and there's a ton of documentation around that. It's like 853 in a sense, right? The process maps very closely to the certification and accreditation process. Sitting where I was in that position, I could see a problem, right? And that's what I love Paramify, right? And what I try to do is solve problems. So what the problem that I saw was that, I don't have to tell you, the Word documents, PDFs, spreadsheets, flying around. When we make a change to our policy, somebody has to download and God forbid, maybe even print out a document and mark it up and then go figure out what it means. Then it would trace that into because their document conforms to the same table of contents from RFC 3647, but it's not even as clear as 853. So, they have to go figure out, well, that requirement in this policy is in section 4, but I think I put it in section 6.2 in my policy. So I have to figure all that. And I have to do it every year, and I have to do it every time an update is made, either to my policy or their policy, right? So it's really complicated. And being a person sitting at the center and assisting, kind of managing the process and being the guy who's actually handling all of that documentation as part of the process, I felt the problem more keenly than, anybody else. So I would sit there going through this thinking there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way. So that's where I started, right? I didn't start with OSCAL. I started with this is a big problem. There's got to be a better way, right? I mean, I would love to get rich, right? But I wasn't even like, this is a great problem. I can get totally rich, right, off this. I was like, this is a big problem. And it just annoys me that people are doing things in a dumb way when there's got to be a better way to do it. So I started playing around with tooling and understanding how can we take, right, the first step, unstructured Word documents, PDFs, whatever. How can we turn them into a structured representation that you can then wrap automation around? So I did some proof of concepts and stuff like that with my own kind of structured representation that I made up. But I realized that very quickly that although the problem of managing this little piece of the documentation was a problem that I noticed, because again, I'm kind of sitting at the center and handling all of this stuff as it goes through. Each individual participant, it operates at a level of suck that they've accepted, right? And furthermore, that's one part of a larger process. There are lots and lots of dependent processes downstream. So for me to come to the people and say, hey, I've got this wonderful tool that'll let you do this one little part of the process, fantastic, isn't that great? They'll be like, it's not bad, but does that mean I have to rewrite all of my other tooling to accept that? And what am I going to do with that? And it's okay, it's better, but it's not enough better for me to change the way that I work, right? So that was after talking to people, listening, being humble, right? I guess that's the second lesson, right? You think you've got a great idea. Once you got your prototype, like, go talk to people and say, I can solve this problem for you. Here's how I can solve the problem. And they'll be like, it looks beautiful, but actually the problem is this other thing. That's part of it, but there's this other big problem that you're not looking at. So listen to those people, be humble. And so I started thinking, okay, well, I started with this problem, but now that I understand the full scope of the problem and all of the interconnections between these related problems, my feeling is that whatever I propose has to solve the whole problem. And as a side effect of solving the whole problem, it'll solve the little problem I started with, right? But I got to solve the whole problem, because I can't improve. I can't offer an improvement in one part of the process that's going to make more work for every other part of the process. That's not moving the needle the right direction. And so we started looking around and started rated out OSCAL as this. I've Googled like probably standards for expressing security requirements or compliance languages or something like that, and OSCAL came up on the list. And I was okay. That's interesting. It's freely available. It's open. There seems to be some community support. And I think like they're going to have a meetup in a couple of weeks in the DC area. So I'm in the DC area. So let me go hang out and just talk to folks and see what was going on. So so I guess that really was how OSCAL came into the picture, because you came to understand that if I wanted to solve the problem that I originally started out to solve, I have to offer a solution that isn't going to make everything else in the customer's life worse. And so OSCAL, because it's a broad specification that covers the entire life cycle, if I can produce some OSCAL, right, then suddenly that means that there's the on-ramp to all of that other tooling that can solve all of the other problems. And I don't necessarily have to be the one that solves the whole problem, right? If I can allow people to get from our proprietary document infrastructure into a standards-based, to just get this one piece into a standards-based structured representation, then Suddenly we're on the field, right? We're at the 15-yard line. Okay, we got a lot of work to do, but we're there. We're on the field and got our jerseys on. And so I think for someone, first of all, it helps. It's been I think a couple of years that I've been working on this since I had the first idea, right? Before OSCAL, before anything. And I've got client work and I've got a family and I've got responsibilities. So time you spend working on this has to be above all of that, right? And so that means it has to be a problem that bugs you. I think you have to, you have to be passionate. Even if the passion is, God, this is so annoying. I have got to make it so that I don't have to do this annoying thing anymore. Nobody should do this annoying thing, right? Because that'll drive you, right? Because it's going to take a long time and it's going to take a lot of energy. Start with a clear problem, understand the problem, and be prepared when you go to somebody and they say, okay, that's, I admit that this tool will make this part of it better, but it'll make everything else worse. That's not like, don't just keep going. Stop and say, all right, wait. This is a learning moment for me. Don't necessarily decide that you have to solve the whole problem, right? Maybe you still want to concentrate on your piece, but in order for that piece to be solved, right, you have to fit into to a larger solution set. And so, I guess that's tree lessons. Three's the magic number, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, 100%. What I think of is you're trying to, when you get into a product, eventually you think of like, what do people want? What people want is here, and like what's going to exceed their expectations is up here.
Right.
What they want. And then there's like the base level is like what they, and a lot of times people, that's why it's so hard to actually give somebody what they need, right? To produce something that actually provides value and say, oh yeah, I need this, right? And so if people are if you're building a tool for someone and they can't use it, they're going to be ticked off like right at the very beginning, and they're going to be like, non-starter. And building that is so hard, so much harder. It's 1,000,000 times harder than you think. Like you go, oh yeah, I think this will be easy, right? And so it is absolutely important that when you do engage in something like this, that you have the domain expertise, like you have, like that you really have it, and that you really understand the problem. Because and you got to niche down, like you said, it's got to be like, what is the quickest way to get value on the smallest little thing? For us, it was just like section 13 of a FedRAMP document. They're like, hey, could you automate, this? Could you make it a little bit more streamlined, focused on capabilities? And I'm like, yeah, probably. Like I had to get that out of them, but it was after like my initial deal for like, I was just doing vCISO things. My initial jobs were like, I think I'm going to build like a GRC tool, because I don't really love the ones that I've used so far. They're more, they make it harder, to do the job than just a spreadsheet. And that's why people still use spreadsheet. Like I always tell people, I majored in Excel, man. I love Excel. It's great, but it doesn't scale, right? It doesn't scale. And so when we were looking at tools, we're like, hey, and I would talk to people and they say, I don't want that. I don't need that. I already have Jira for that. I'm like, okay. But where the significant pain was, like you said, is in managing the paper chase. It's awful.
Yeah.
Right. And we just moved offices. We're here in Lehi, Utah. I spent many years at Adobe building the Adobe Common Controls framework. We open sourced it. We made it and the whole objective was, how do we make it, InfoSec or cyber and risk management in general? How do we make this more approachable for developers, so that they can focus on doing, the mission. The mission is like, risk management is security, and compliance is usually the outcome of excellent security, right? And sometimes you start with compliance, right? Anyway, I just think it's really important, like those principles you mentioned for the audience. If you're in the InfoSec space, if you really want to have a great career, you get joy not out of like just money and showing up for a job. It's like, dude, I'm going to try and make life better for people, right? We're going to try and advance the cause and move it forward. And we know that at the end, right, there's going to be a decent outcome for us, but you really have to be excited about the problem you're solving so that you can enjoy the journey right now, right? Like I'm reading your posts, and it's exciting to me because you're like saying, hey, the catalogs that we're producing in the tool now have their significant improvements, so you're experiencing like, whoa, we've got something. And that is part of the reward of being here in and of itself. It's like you feel like you've kind of already won. And when you're winning, guess what? People are going to want to join you, right? Because you're already winning. So that victory happens like really internally is what I'm hearing from you. And I just love it. It just gets me pumped, right? Hearing this. And that's why I'm talking to pros like you, right? So go ahead. You have something.
Yeah, no, you're right. You absolutely have to believe it yourself, because it's going to be a slog, right? And there's going to be times when it would just be easier to not do it, right? And there's this curve, right? When anytime you try to improve state of affairs, whether you're improving yourself, whether you're improving finances, whether you're working on your company, whether you're working on a product, right? You put a lot of work in before you see any improvement, before you get the outcome that you want, right? So you got to have something that's going to drive you, right? It's got to be a little bit of faith, right? You got to believe that, okay, at the end of the day, this is not all going to be wasted time, right? But it really helps if you understand the problem and you can see, you can foresee the solution, right? You can foresee the problem being solved. You can see the end state, and that at some level, even if, like, aside from money, which everybody wants, right? You get excited about the end state, right? Then that will get you up like every morning at, my alarm goes off at 4:30, right? Every morning you come down, get a coffee, start coding, right? And it's like, it's just me doing most of the work, right? So that you got to have something that will drive you to do that, right? Or else you'll peter out. And if you're not excited about it, don't do it. If you're not excited about it, don't do it, because you're gonna get tired or you're gonna stop. Go find something you're excited about. Do that.
Really, I mean, there's only so many companies that ever make like their first $1 million in revenue. I think it's something like 4%, right? And 4% of companies, right? And what the difference is really you have to find joy in that journey. It cannot be money. And that's why I think, honestly, that those companies that get a big chunk of VC funding or a big chunk of funding at the very beginning before they've actually validated, like you're going and validating it, those are, they're just different products, right? Because they built cool technology that's looking for a problem to be solved.
Yeah.
And it's just hard, right? And so if you don't have product market fit, you need to go get it. And if you're motivated only by this, like, this shiny pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, it's gonna be hard.
You're not going to carry it. Yeah, it's going to be hard days, man.
And that's why people don't do it. And that's why people quit. Yeah. Because I just saw this like great like post from CEO of NVIDIA, and he said, okay, he got interviewed. He's like, okay, you're 30 years old. You're going back. What would you do? Like, what would you tell that person? What would you do now? And he goes, oh, I wouldn't have done it. Right? I wouldn't have built this amazing company. I wouldn't have done it because like it was like 1 million times harder than I thought it would be. It's beyond just the technical challenges. It's getting that belief. Yeah. So you mentioned, Rob, you have to have faith. You have to have a vision of what it looks like. And leadership is creating this vision that becomes a reality because you're just working towards that vision. And I just love it. It just pumps me up, man. So let's talk more about this. The quality of your catalog has recently seen some significant improvements. So tell us a little bit about your insights and just the methodologies or best practices you implemented to achieve this, right?
So there's a challenge, right? 853, first of all, it's a big document, right? There's a lot in there, but I will say I honestly love the document, right? I also don't have to do CNA stuff that anymore, so maybe that's why I love it. But it's structured, right? The requirements are very clearly expressed, and you can tell that this thing is a requirement and that thing is not a requirement, right? They're all grouped together in a logical ordering, and of course, people can and will argue forever about which logical ordering makes more sense. But there's a defensible framework, right? So outside in other specifications, federal PKI, PKI, I will say in general, RFC 3647 is a very interesting standard. It's a table of contents, right? Actually, so that says a PKI policy should have this table of contents, and that tells you, the basic subjects you need to cover. But there's not a list of requirements at all in RFC 3647, and so there's this kind of emergent list of requirements that has grown up organically since the 90s, and has changed significantly and all of that sort of stuff. But that's a very long way of saying that where the 853 catalog looks great because it comes out of 853, which is already a really structured document, and the OSCAL standard was designed for 853. Outside, if you're trying to do something else, you're going to have to create a lot of things. So my standards documents that I operate with, certificate policies, it's a mixture of pros and requirements, and sometimes a requirement actually has a requirement word in there, like shall, should, or must, right? Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it says is, not describing something, but telling you what you have to do. And so there's a ambiguity in the underlying documents.
That's right.
So over time, a person who wants to take a specific policy and turn it into a specific catalog will be able to do a great job. But if you want to create a tool that can take any certificate policy and create a catalog that's pretty good, you have to make a lot of assumptions. And that's so the first round was really just let's take the Word document, let's convert it to Markdown, let's run it through a natural language processor so that we can at least break it into sentences, because each sentence generally is a thought, and it's probably a requirement, and probably just one requirement, sometimes 0, sometimes 2, whatever, but let's ignore that complexity. We've got a tokenized version, right? So every it's in Markdown, so it's relatively easy to process compared to Microsoft Word, I'll tell you. And then let's take this thing and create an OSCAL catalog. So we have to make a decision. The table of contents is very important because it's based on our 3647. So we should keep that structure. Let's make that a group, right? Okay, let's call that a group. Sometimes a group is really just a section heading, but sometimes it has text in it. And sometimes that text is informative text. It just tells you this section is about whatever. Sometimes it has requirements. And there are sections with both normative and informative, and they're not really well marked in a way that a computer can easily figure out. So what I mean to say is that you make a lot of assumptions, you make a lot of decisions as you're creating a tool to automatically convert some arbitrary document into an OSCAL catalog. So the first one was the simplest catalog that the OSCAL CLI parser, Dave's work from NIST, would not throw up all over, right? So we got there. That was version 1. Okay, it works, right? It works. We made a lot of decisions. We learned, even more stuff about OSCAL because there's just so much there. I thought I knew everything. And then fantastic. But when we look at it as a document that's going to have to be fed into a tool, it has some gaps, right? So we didn't in version 1 do a really great job distinguishing between things that are requirements and things that are not requirements. Yeah. Now we did that because the underlying document often doesn't make that distinction very well. But a tool is going to have that. If it's operating on a structured representation, it's going to have to know these are the things an auditor is going to have to look at, and these are the things an auditor is going to have to look at. So I talked to Michaela. If you're into OSCAL, get on the Gitter, right? The community's there. It's great. It is genuinely helpful, right? And you can literally talk to the people who write the standards, right? And they're very friendly. And that doesn't mean that they'll tell you when you're doing the wrong thing, but that's invaluable feedback. So you want that. So get on there. So I submitted it and I said, this is version 1. And Michaela said, it's good effort. Let's talk next week. So I was like, okay, I'm getting called to the principal's office. So we talked about okay, these are the problems. This is the catalog get parsed, but a tool will not understand what to do with it, and it won't help, won't solve the problem, right? It's just an OSCAL catalog. We don't just need an OSCAL catalog. We need a solution to a problem. So,
So talk about that. So real quick though, also, I got to say, Michaela is one of the most impressive people that I met. Her command of just computer science and I was she called me because they found an issue with something and she was talking through it, and I didn't realize the depth of her just genius in the space. And so because she's so kind, right? She's so kind and amazing. But okay. Yeah. So Michaela, you're great. Love you. Yeah.
She started designing ships, right? She's a naval architect. So all this computer science stuff is just something she did. She was bored of designing ships. So so she's amazing. Amazing.
Oh man, I actually didn't know that. That's amazing. But you know what impresses me the most is her kindness. That's what I love about Michaela. So anyways, okay. You got to tell the audience, right? Because I try to articulate it, and sometimes because to me OSCAL is the standard that helped me just ensure maximum flexibility for reporting. If someone has an OSCAL catalog from your tool, what does that mean? If you get an OSCAL catalog, what is the benefit that they get?
So there are 2 questions, right? And I'm getting ready to go really shop this around to folks at Federal PKI so I get to practice my pitch, right? There are 2 questions, right? The first question is a structured representation of a document better than an unstructured representation of a document? Unstructured means Word, there are paragraphs and there are things, but there's no semantic meaning in the presentation, right? You as a human have to read it and process it with your brain, right? So sometimes there's not a benefit to a structured representation. Sometimes an unstructured representation is better in an area where there are requirements, where the document feeds a process, right? Very often a structured representation is a better way to start the process because you can categorize things and understand which things you care about and which things you don't care about and who cares about which parts. First, so OSCAL is a structured representation. Secondly, there are a million structured representations, and you mentioned spreadsheets, and we love to hate them, and we all use them, and that's a structured representation, right? The challenge with the spreadsheet is that everybody, often every individual creates their own spreadsheet. So it's a structured representation, but it's a structured representation that has exactly one application. your brain, right? That's the platform it runs on, nowhere else. So if you decide that you'd like a structured representation, the next question is which structured representation? What are the benefits of a good structured representation? A good structured representation has a lot of tooling to support it, and will integrate well with closely related processes. So you have to do an audit for federal PKI, but every federal agency who does an audit for federal PKI has to do an 853 for the same systems, right? The exact same systems. The first thing I did when I was brought onto the federal PKI support team was to write what's called an overlay, which is to say, if you've got a federal PKI system, you also have to do an ATO. So here's some stuff that will help you make your ATO better and help you do it faster, because there's some stuff that's in the federal policy that applies directly to your ATO. We're just going to find it for you and tell you where to look for it. So having a structured representation that is a standard that can encode 853 and encode federal PKI policy means that you really get to benefit from a set of tooling and processes designed around that tooling that can operate on the same data, produce the same outcomes, reduce the amount of redundant effort you have to go through, and help you really like save a lot of time and effort, because you've standardized on a particular structured representation that has very rich tool support. And of course, it's from NIST, it's freely available, royalty free. So you don't have to pay anybody for it, and you don't have to spend a lot of time producing a representation that fits into your particular vendor tool. Then it goes out of business, or you got another tool and you got to go do that instead, right?
Yeah.
Or that as well.
What is usually
So I think that's OSCA, right?
Yeah. What is
Do you need a structured representation? Often, not always. Which structured representation? Well, one that has a lot of supporting tools, open, royalty free. That's a great one if you can use it.
It's great. Yeah, that's awesome. What is usually the baseline for 853 for a PKI system, like typically?
We are often at moderate, but the overlay assumes high, because there are some cases where high is the right answer.
Mm-hmm. So for parameters, from a parameters perspective, yeah, cool, yeah. Well, that's amazing. So Rob, you offer assistance for those interested in converting their policies to OSCAL. So what motivated you to provide this support, and what do you hope to achieve doing this?
The first thing that I want to achieve is to make the shortest return on investment will be the tool will get better, because you have inputs, right? You have a process and an output. We've got a consistent output, but the more variety there is in the input, the better your code has to be at normalizing all those things, and you discover lots and lots of different things about how people encode requirements so that you get a consistent outcome. So the first thing is the tool will get better. That's one of the main reasons I want to do it. Secondly, I truly believe that introducing OSCAL into the conversation in a way that is zero effort, right? Now, you still have to understand OSCAL. You still have to get it into your GRC tool. You have to, if you don't have a GRC tool that speaks to OSCAL, you'll have some stuff to do, but at least the process of converting your Word document into OSCAL is something that might sound scary, and is probably scarier than it sounds if you don't know OSCAL, right? We know. I mean, it's a complicated standard. It has to be. It's as simple as it can be, but it's so very complicated. And so, from my perspective, I think it's really important. I think it's going to make a significant, I think it's going to significantly improve the outcomes. I think it's also going to significantly improve the process in terms of cost and in terms of frustration of managing the compliance documentation and compliance artifacts. I'm not sure if anyone else, I'm not sure if anybody has a line item on their budget that says, go investigate converting our policy to an OSCAL catalog. So I just wanted to take that out of the conversation. You don't have to have a budget line. If you ask me, I will help you. Or if you want to send me your policy and say, yeah, it's fine if you do this, I will happily take it and convert it and give you an OSCAL catalog. It won't cost you anything. Because it's really important that we all sort of take that first step and that we make a smooth and on-ramp.
Yeah. Okay. So, Rob, you've had a pretty awesome career. You're still in it, and it looks like you've got another 2 decades in it. So, looking ahead as an OSCAL gains traction in the cyber community, what do you see as key milestones, like as indicators that it's going to continue this adoption in the coming years?
So one of the key dependencies, and something that I kind of struggle with because I work on the content side, right? I work on producing catalogs. I don't in my day job work on using the catalog, processing and fitting them into processes. So I think that one of the challenges you have as you're developing catalogs is that it's really tough to actually find someone who will take your catalog, load it into their tool, and say, my tool threw up all over it, it's garbage, right? So there's the OSCAL CLI, which will tell you whether it's valid and well formed. That's important. But going beyond valid and well formed, I have a requirement divided into parts. I label the parts in a certain way. What does that mean for the user when they load it into your tool, right? Is it like you need to pay attention to this, or is it ignored? Because the specification of the standard is very well described, very well defined, but the way that tools interpret the contents is not as well defined and kind of left as an exercise to the reader. So I think broader tool support and a kind of agreement between various tool vendors about what it actually means when you have a property, right? I have parts that are called I have a label for informative parts and a label for normative parts. It's my sincere hope and belief that tools will display them differently to the user, but I haven't had a chance to look at every tool. If the tool vendors could all agree, when you put this property in your catalog, what it means for the user experience is, the user will know that this is important.
Yeah.
They will not be shown this thing unless they look for it, right? So there's basic rules about what we actually do with a catalog, because nobody wants a catalog, right? Nobody wants a catalog. They have a compliance process. They want help with their compliance process. So we have a great specification for catalogs. I think as the space matures, and one of the things that will make it successful is that there's broad agreement about what the heck that catalog means when you load it into a tool, and what the user should be expected to do based on the contents of the catalog.
Yeah.
First. Secondly, I think seeing more and more use cases brought in, and I think for the perspective of, again, solving a problem for the customers and the biggest possible problem, I think the new mapping specification, that's something that I'm paying particularly close attention to, and is going to be the next focus of my own development, is figuring out two things: how different standards relate to each other. Remember, if you have a federal PKI system and you have to undergo a federal PKI audit, you also have to go through an 853 CNA, right? So we all know that there are a lot of requirements that are the same requirement wearing different hats, right? So taking the mapping structures and all of those things so that it's very straightforward for someone to identify when they're looking at the same requirement in a different hat, right? That starts to extend the benefit of OSCAL beyond 853, where it's tremendously beneficial, but for everyone else to benefit, some economy of scale would be absolute game changer. So I'm really excited about the mapping thing. And I think those are the two big things, right? Of course, besides the PKI policy converter, the PKI policy converter labels a library, actually leverages a library that I wrote called oscal-pki-policy-converter. And the objective of that library, which is also freely available, open source and independent, so you don't have to get the converter to get the library, is to be able to take the specification of OSCAL and expose it in a way that somebody who's familiar with Python and not familiar with OSCAL and not familiar with metaschema will just feel it'll be very natural to express OSCAL catalogs in Python. So more tooling like that, right? And more languages are coming online, and that's great. That's fantastic. But I think that there needs to be a rich ecosystem of tooling, because there will be vendors, there will be big, black box products. Those are going to be very important because they offer a lot of benefits, and there's very good reasons and places to use them. But no matter what, you'll need a lot of glue code and you'll need a lot of other stuff. And I think having a rich library of freely available tools to process OSCAL at a relatively low level, right? So there's no interface, but you're able to mess with the objects in a way that feels intuitive in the language at a very low level, right? And do conversion and whatever else you need. I think that's going to be a third piece.
That's awesome.
That's three.
So Rob, thanks for the detail and helping people really. I think this is a great episode for people trying to get into OSCAL. So I guess to close, your advice, if you have any, for people that are looking, we talked about the entrepreneurial things, but people looking to break into cyber, what advice would you give them? And then finally, how do people get involved with what you're doing and in the OSCAL community in general? So those three things, right? So go ahead.
So I have talked to a bunch of different security people over the years, and I've been in the position of trying to get a job, and I've been in the position of being a hiring guy. I don't know what will get you a specific job, right? So some people are like, I want to get one of those InfoSec jobs. I've heard it's a lot of, it's great money. We'll go back to the money conversation. We covered that. Like, money's fantastic. There's going to be a point where you're like, this is not worth. This is like the potential future money I might be making is not going to be worth the suffering I have right now, right? So if you want to get into information security, it should be something that you find intrinsically fun and interesting. I would also encourage you not to focus on information security, because information security always exists in a context. I have a very broad background in computing. I got my first InfoSec job because I played a lot with Linux in my living room, right? And I was able to answer a very specific technical question at a great detail. And they were like, this guy doesn't know anything about security, but he knows a lot about this thing, and we need that skill on our team. So let's get him in. We'll teach him the security stuff, right? People who only know security have relatively limited value to offer. Right. I would encourage you to understand how the technology that you have to secure works. Like, really understand it at a deep level. There should be two two things that you can do. One, you should be able to answer the question. Like, if somebody asks you, I'm going to ask you right now, don't answer. It's a long answer. You type an address into your browser and then you're looking at a web page, tell me everything that happens from when you hit enter to when you're looking at a web page, right? Because there are so many layers, and to understand the security implications of systems and all, you have to understand all these layers and how they interact and what's going on. You can't be like the guy who just knows 853, right? There are a ton of these guys in DC. All they know is 853. They don't know what it means. They don't know anything about technology. Secondly, understanding the background in which security operates. So we talked about being able to understand how systems actually work when they're running. The other thing is to be conversant with a programming language, right? It doesn't have to be any particular programming language, but one of the most fun things I've ever done as a security, like mean security guy, was I was interacting with a development team at a big company. Last time I made the mistake of working for a big company, and they had a ticket. We'd had a staff code analyzer that had flagged a bunch of stuff, right? And both us and the development team knew that there was a lot of false positives, but we were arguing about it. So I was sitting in an office room with the developer, who was explaining to me, actually that's a false positive because it says that it accepts user input, but it actually doesn't accept user input. It's just the way that the code works. It looks like it accepts user input. So okay, bring the code up for me, and we'll read it together, and I'll ask you questions, and you can explain to me how it works. And the freaking guy got so scared, right? Because like, this isn't like, well, I had this canned response, it didn't work, right? So it's a little fun, but it's not the point. The point is that when somebody tells you it's a false positive, I wasn't familiar with his particular, it was Java, so I know a little bit of Java, but I'm like a Java guru. But I can look at code and I can say, I understand that this is a call, this is a variable. I understand that the variable appears here. So, that comes from some source, and then it's treated this way in the body of the code. So when they say it's a false positive because it comes from a reliable source, fantastic, show me, right? And if you're reasonably conversant with a programming language, they can show you and you'll understand the explanation. You'll be satisfied. Otherwise, people are going to lie to you all day, every day.
Yeah.
You definitely have to do that a couple of times, like make them show you the code and talk through them with it, and they just don't try to pull that anymore because they know that you will call.
You can't know everything, right? You can't know everything, so you got to understand something very deeply before you start to provide value. Yeah, totally great. Okay, just real quick, we gotta wrap up here, but how do people get involved with what you're doing, and then the OSCAL community? Well, how do we find you?
OSCAL community is super easy, super open. Go to OSCAL, find the Gitter. I think it's linked from the NIST site, but I'm sure Kenny will put a link in the show.
Yeah, we'll put a link
to the Gitters.
That's right.
So it's start by showing up and listening. The meta scheme is a little tough to read, but you will have to learn to read it at some point, depending on what you're working on, right? If you're working on tooling, you'll really have to come to understand it. Otherwise, you can look at the catalogs and the system security plans and stuff and understand what they're trying to do and why they're structured the way they are. It exists in the context of a process, so spend some time understanding the process that it works within. But yeah, it's all there, and there aren't a lot of roadmaps between the beginning and like wherever the ending is. I haven't gotten there yet, but I can tell you there aren't any roadmaps. But there's a great community of folks who will be willing to help. So go there. There's a great site, oscal.io. Relatively new. They have some material up there. They have some examples of tooling, so you can look at code that processes OSCAL to understand how that works, right? And there's just a ton of ways to get into it if you want to get into OSCAL for the sake of OSCAL, right?
That's great. That's great. Well, Rob, I told everybody you're one of the good ones. You proved me right. So thanks so much for your time. Appreciate you. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks a lot. Talk to you later.